Dorothy Dwan was a popular comedian and leading lady at the end of the silent era and successfully began starring in the Talkies in 1930. But following a few Talkie appearances, she retired. Why? Join me as I investigate. Dorothy Dwan was born as Dorothy Ilgenfritz in 1906 in Sedalia, Missouri, to Nancy and Melvin Ilgenfritz. Apparently, her parents' marriage was not a happy one, and Nancy separated from Melvin and moved young Dorothy with her to California before officially divorcing him in 1912. In 1915, Nancy married Colonel George Hugh Smith, who was from Pennsylvania. Various sources indicate that they moved to Pennsylvania after the marriage, where Dorothy attended school. But by 1922, the family was back in Hollywood. Nancy began working as a successful publicist there. Sometime around this time, Dorothy was discovered by an old friend of her mother's who worked for Universal. Wishing to change her name, Dorothy decided on Dwan to pay tribute to her favorite director, Alan Dwan. She may have also had work as an extra before this point. Later that year, Dorothy made her official screen debut in the Vitagraph Western, The Silent Vow, which starred William Duncan and Edith Johnson. Dorothy had a major supporting role. For some reason, she took a 2-year break after this. It's unclear what she did, but perhaps she finished high school. She returned to the screen in 1924 and first had a few bit parts and then supported Adolphe Menjou and Eleanor Boardman in Sinners and Silk at MGM, before beginning a successful professional and personal partnership with the popular comedian Larry Seaman, whom she would marry a year later and appear with in 8 films over the next few years. First, Dorothy and Larry starred in the comedy short Her Boyfriend, which saw Dorothy as Detective Iva Method, who works with the police to spy on crooked bootleggers. This film, as in many of their films, also starred Oliver Hardy. That same year, Dorothy, Larry, and Oliver starred in Kid Speed, concerning a wealthy man's daughter and the 2 zany race car drivers that compete for her hand. In 1925, Dorothy and Larry starred in another short, The Cloudhopper, as well as the feature-length comedy The Perfect Clown, which concerned a zany bank clerk and his girlfriend suddenly in possession of thousands of dollars. In all of these films, Dorothy more than held her own alongside Larry and Oliver, proving she was quite adept at physical comedy. However, the trio had their most famous collaboration also in 1925, the first feature-length movie version of The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy played Dorothy, Larry the Scarecrow, and Oliver Hardy the Tin Man. However, this version of the famous Oz story does not match the later, more famous version very much. Instead, it was more based on the play rather than Baum's original novel. The film has a reputation of being a critical and commercial failure. However, that's not exactly correct. Critically, the New York Times, Variety, and Photoplay praised it and called it a perfect film for children. While Larry got mixed reviews overall for his zany performance as the Scarecrow, he was praised by several publications for his performance. Unfortunately, the producing company, Chadwick Pictures, went bankrupt upon its release, so many theaters never even received their reels of the film, resulting in it suffering a staggering financial loss, which many film historians have linked sadly to the downfall of Larry Seaman's career. However, Larry and Dorothy were able to make a few more films together after 1925, including Stop, Look, and Listen in 1926 and Spuds in 1927. Apart from her husband, Dorothy found other work starring in films and several silents over the next 4 years, including several westerns. Being a Western leading lady was quite a surprise for Dorothy, who told an interviewer that she had not set out to be one, but it had happened nonetheless. However, just as in comedy, Dorothy proved herself to be adept at being a tough lady of the West. Highlights of her Western and adventure work include The Call of the Klondike in 1926, The Great K&A Train Robbery, also in 1926, which was one of her many collaborations with Tom Mix at Fox, Hills of Kentucky in 1927, and Silver Valley, also in 1927, again with Tom Mix. However, tragedy struck in 1928. Larry had never recovered from the financial failure of The Wizard of Oz, and not finding the same level of success he had once enjoyed after that, he began to sink into a deep depression. While he did have a hit film appearing in Underworld in 1927 with Evelyn Brent and George Bancroft, few film offers followed, and he found himself on the vaudeville stage after being forced to declare bankruptcy. Due to his depression and anxiety, his body and immune system weakened, and he became seriously ill with a deadly case of pneumonia combined with tuberculosis, and sadly passed away in October of 1928 at just 39 years old. Devastated, Dorothy also found herself now in debt, having inherited all of her late husband's debt upon his death. She went back to work at various studios to begin paying the bills and starred in several films over the next few years, including Square Crooks, Riders of the Dark, both of these from 1928, and The California Mail and The Drifter, both in 1929. In 1930, Dorothy successfully transitioned to starring in the talkies, appearing in 2 films. First, she supported Catherine Crawford and James Murray in Hideout at Universal. Next, also at Universal, she starred with Ken Maynard in The Fighting Legion, a Western. For The Fighting Legion, Film Daily stated that Dorothy Dwan does a nice bit as the heroine. Despite having a success with this film, and apparently having quite the successful voice on the screen, Dorothy called it quits upon its completion in 1930. She married Paul Boggs that same year, and a year later gave birth to their son, Paul. There's not much information out there about the rest of Dorothy's life. One source indicates that she became a publicist alongside her mother and remained close to all of her Hollywood friends. Her son's obituary touches on this when it's stated that he was friends with Shirley Temple as a child, but Dorothy showed no interest in acting again and chose to devote all of her time to her family. Dorothy Dwan passed away in 1981 at the age of 74. So we are left with the question, why did Dorothy Dwan retire so soon after she made such a successful transition to the talkies? Well, we have that answer from Dorothy herself. She wanted to retire and spend time with her son. It's understandable. I can't imagine the devastation she went through after Larry's death and then having to take on all of his debt as well. I'm sure it took a toll on her. It's no wonder that she looked for an out from the industry that had caused her success, but also caused her a large amount of unhappiness. While it's a shame that she retired so early, we at least have several of her films left to enjoy. You can find most of her comedies with Larry Seaman on YouTube, including The Wizard of Oz and Her Boyfriend. You can also find the silent version of The Fighting Legion there as well. Dorothy Dwan was an immensely talented actor that should have had a bigger name, but despite that, still managed to carve out a niche for herself as a versatile performer who transcended genres. What a legend. I must thank my sources for this episode. Curtin's Blogspot, George Katchmer's A Biographical Dictionary of Silent Film Western Actors and Actresses, Claudia Sassen's Larry Seaman, Daredevil Comedian of the Silent Screen, Variety, The New York Times, and Film Daily. Please like and subscribe or follow this account if you want to learn more about the history of silent film stars whose stardom lasted only briefly in the talkies. Up next, join me as I cover the silent to talkie career of Edward Earl. Thank you so much for joining me. Enjoy your weekend.